Dave saw one of the episodes already edited together, and he walked up, him and Carrie Beck, like both like glossy-eyed, and he said to me that it was a religious experience.
Alright, let's begin. Originally, I was gonna do a play-by-play of each episode like I did for Kenobi, but I figured that would take too long, and after that abysmal train wreck of a finale, I kinda just want to rant. And despite the fact that each episode has several long stretches and pauses in order to pad out the runtime, making for very little actual content, the sheer volume of absolute world-breaking ineptitude on full display here is shocking, and there's a lot to break down. I just think it would be a lot more organized if I put it all together rather than trying to lay it all out for you chronologically. For those of you who are new here, Dave Filoni and I have a bit of a love-hate relationship. And by that, I mean I used to love him and now I passionately despise him, all the while he has no idea that I even exist. And I'd rather keep it that way. It gives him a false sense of security. In any case, he created a character 15 years ago and hasn't been able to let go of her since, even though she's vastly overstayed her welcome, both chronologically and in a meta sense, to the point where for the last several years, she's just kind of been hanging out, not doing anything of substance because she's waiting for her own show to come out, and now it's here. What was once just a dream is now a frightening reality for those who care about storytelling. So just to recap, The Mandalorian Season 2 was the first time we saw Ahsoka and got a glimpse of what she's been up to in this post-Return of the Jedi landscape, not counting the Rebels epilogue, which I'm happy enough to do since that's what the show did. It turned out she was searching for Grand Admiral Thrawn, who canonically disappeared at the end of Rebels, along with Ezra Bridger via space whales that can jump into hyperspace. That is a thing that really happened, and now we're finally following up on that, so this should be fun. In all seriousness, most of you probably know that I like Rebels, but I'm not the kind of guy to pretend that it doesn't have any flaws. It has a lot of flaws, and when that show misses, it really, really misses. The major problems I always had with it are that the space whales exist and were used as a plot device to get Ezra and Thrawn out of commission for the sole reason that their presence during the OT would fuck with too much, which oddly enough conflicts with the other major problem that I have with that show, which is that Ahsoka survived to a point past Return of the Jedi, meaning she was present and knew several of the key players in the rebellion while the original trilogy was happening. So I wouldn't exactly say that these issues make for a great foundation for a show, and yet this is our premise. Ahsoka wants to find Thrawn because she's been hearing rumors of his return and obviously wants to put a stop to that if she can, and the first episode confirms for a fact that she apparently never told anyone in the New Republic about these rumors.
Star map? Not just any star map. This one holds the secret Morgan's after.
Which is?
Thrawn.
That's not possible. Thrawn died at the Battle of Lothal.
I started hearing whispers of his return, which led me to Morgan.
And that strongly implies she never told Luke either. This is something that I literally joked about in my Mando Season 3 video, and now for some reason they actually made it canon, so... It's also confirmed that this is set after Mando Season 3.
There is no proof of any coordination between the scattered and dwindling number of Imperial forces.
What about the conflict on Mandalore?
But I guess even though Ahsoka captured Morgan all the way back in Season 2, she's only just now managed to find out the location of the MacGuffin map and gone to find it. I mean, I know the timeline of these shows is absolutely fucked, and it's not actually clear how much time has passed between the Mando seasons. Wikipedia will tell you that this all takes place in 9 ABY, which would suggest that every event in the Mandoverse spans over the course of months. But then you have to wonder how Navarro managed to rebuild as fast as it did, or how the Mandalorian covert was able to repopulate so quickly, and just generally how so many events could happen within 1 year. But if it's actually been several years, that makes it significantly worse, because that means Morgan was being held prisoner for all that time and apparently only just now gave Ahsoka the information she wants. Ahsoka is apparently operating as some kind of authority within the New Republic. At the very least, she's in pretty good standing with the powers that be, to the point where her testimony apparently carries weight in determining the validity of Thrawn's threat.
You and Ahsoka Tano are to return to Coruscant with the fleet. You are going to need her testimony to help you.
Yet she's holding prisoners of war for years without some kind of trial beforehand and torturing said prisoners for information, and the New Republic are just okay with that?
Right where Morgan said it would be.
How did you get her to tell the truth?
Let's just say I didn't follow standard Jedi protocol.
Holy shit, Ahsoka, that's really bad. Jesus. And this person is supposed to be a Jedi? Well, yes, but also no. I don't know, the show refuses to give us a clear answer on the matter. Last we checked, she didn't consider herself a Jedi.
I am no Jedi.
which of course makes sense since she officially wasn't one by the end of the Clone Wars and nothing seems to have changed. But she's constantly referred to as a Jedi in this show, and she apparently took Sabine on as a Padawan specifically with the goal of her being trained as a Jedi, so I guess she is one, and yet she's down with torture. Alright, then this all seems like completely contradictory information, but sure. I'm positive that this show will explain all of this in due time. We're gonna learn where she's been the last 12 years, what she's been doing, how she's changed and grown since Rebels, and of course whether or not she actually considers herself a Jedi. And obviously this goes without saying, but the show will give us a clear explanation of what she was doing during the OT that was more important than the redemption of Anakin Skywalker and the defeat of the Galactic Empire. So far, all we've done is establish the premise and briefly talked about the main character and what she's been up to, and already we've encountered issues with the timeline and general world building, as well as noticed irreconcilable contradictions in Ahsoka's characterization, or rather lack thereof, and yet for some reason this is the show people are saying is the good one, and that my saying it's really bad is a miss from me. Jesus Christ, we just started and there's already so much garbage to sift through. Since we were already talking about Ahsoka's character, let's just stick with that. The first 4 episodes of this show don't really give us anything aside from that little tidbit where she's apparently down with torture. You'd think that would speak to a darker aspect of her character and would be addressed in some kind of meaningful way later, but it's actually never brought up again. I guess Huyang is fine with these practices. And like I already said, we learned that Ahsoka apparently started training Sabine as a Jedi at some point between this and Rebels, which is its own headache-inducing topic that we need to get into later, but for our discussion about Ahsoka's characterization, what matters here is that neither of these characters ever meant anything to each other in the previous series, so whatever bonding they did during that time, whatever falling out that eventually occurred, which has facilitated the tension we see between them in the first couple of episodes, all happened completely off screen. We never saw any of it. And this by itself isn't necessarily a problem, just so long as the show then goes about developing that off-screen relationship, telling us about it, showing it to us in some way, having the characters directly mention the events that happened that brought them closer together or drove them further apart. I don't know how we're supposed to care about either of them or understand what they mean to one another if the show doesn't bother telling us. And the unfortunate reality is that what the show does tell us is very little and outright assassinates Ahsoka, if I'm understanding it correctly. In episode 4, it's alluded to that Sabine's entire family was killed and that this was a direct result of Ahsoka not trusting Sabine. We're given no more information than that, leaving a lot of room to speculate what actually went down and whether or not that's even true. But what really matters is that Sabine at least seems to believe it, and I seriously question why she doesn't resent Ahsoka because of it. Like I said, there was definitely tension between them in the first few episodes, but it came off more as two people who went different ways in life because they wanted different things, not, you fucking bitch, you killed my family. That's more an issue with Sabine, and there's a whole bunch to say about her characterization in just a bit, but I'd still really like to know what exactly Baylan meant with that line. In the finale, we learn that the reason Ahsoka eventually abandoned Sabine's training is because she feared what she might become in the wake of her family's death and the destruction of her planet, but that all seems to have come after whatever events took place to lead to Clan Ren being killed. It's all very vague, and intentionally so that there are very few definitive statements that can actually be made about it and what it actually means for these characters. This is how Dave Filoni writes. He doesn't give any actual information about anything. He just introduces shit into the story and leaves the surrounding details unhelpfully ambiguous so that you don't actually know what you're being given. And then fans will cling to whatever they can to defend it, even though nobody even really knows what they're actually defending. The style of writing has been consistent throughout all of his work, but it's never been more obvious than with this show. In any case, that's all the information we're given for what happened between Ahsoka and Sabine, and it doubles up as essentially the only explanation for where she was during the original trilogy. I guess she was super busy with her one Padawan that she couldn't help out the rebellion, or see who this Luke Skywalker kid is, claiming to be the son of her former mentor, and who was also a known associate of Obi-Wan Kenobi. None of that mattered because she was busy with all this, I guess. In any case, aside from the few breadcrumbs we're given between her and Sabine, Ahsoka is not given any characterization in the first 4 episodes. And then all of a sudden in episode 5, they decide to randomly inject this inner conflict about Anakin's legacy and how Ahsoka feels to be a part of it. This is not something that was set up at any point prior, and now suddenly it's the central focus of this ass-backwards episode that makes literally no sense on even the most basic mechanical level. But everyone ate it up anyway because, oh look, it's Anakin. Oh look, he turned into Darth Vader. Look, that's live-action Captain Rex and Siege of Mandalore. Oh, how exciting. Even though nobody can even seem to agree on what Anakin's lesson actually was, or if that even really was Anakin. I mean, I think that was him because there was like a moment where he referenced Return of the Jedi in a way that Ahsoka couldn't possibly know about.
I will not fight you, Father.
I won't fight you.
I've heard that before.
Which means he can't be a figure of her imagination, right? Maybe Luke told her about that specific dialogue exchange. Maybe he's not really Anakin, but actually just a manifestation of the Force coming to her in a face she would find familiar. I don't fucking know. They're not telling me anything. He's hiding behind vagueness again. I mean, if this is Anakin, then I take serious issue with pretty much everything they did with him for a multitude of reasons. Not the least of which being that this episode is trying to paint it as though his Force ghost is some kind of amalgamation of both Anakin and Vader, as if they're two halves of some whole that make up what he is, as if that's what balance actually means, even though that was never what it was supposed to be. It completely undermines his redemption if you're trying to tell me he's like half evil or something because he has to carry Vader with him for the rest of eternity. And of course, he was already assassinated in the sequels because he never bothered to talk to Luke or reach out to Kylo while he was literally fucking praying to the burnt helmet of Darth Vader. And that's an irreparable gaping flaw with the sequels, no matter what headcanon you try to make for it, or what books you try to point to act like it's all fixed now. But now we see his ghost multiple times. He shows up at the very end, so I guess he can just do that whenever he wants. That's great.
Oh, it's Anakin.
Why? How are you here? Why are you here? Don't you have a son? You should be talking to him. And no, guys, seriously, like, what was the lesson he was trying to teach her? He spouts the words,
Live or die. Live or die.
A bunch of times, but I don't know what that's actually supposed to mean. Throughout the god-awful, cheap-looking Clone Wars flashbacks we get across the episode, she says she doesn't want to keep fighting because fighting is bad and it can cause people to die, which is a pretty black and white and narrow view on the subject that I only barely believe teenage Ahsoka would believe, let alone a version of her that's supposed to be extremely wise at this point and approaching 50. Either way, I guess the lesson is, like, you have to fight to live, but fighting isn't all bad. I don't know. That's the interpretation that makes the most sense to me, but I don't know how that fits with that weird-ass moment toward the end where she got Sith eyes. That seemed to be implying that she was giving into her darker nature by having committed to fighting, and I thought that was a bad thing. But then she just says,
I choose to live.
And that's it, I guess. Then she got sent back to the real world. The thing is, I don't really care what explanation you give me for what you think the lesson was, because the way it was executed was messy, confusing, and contradicts itself no matter which way you look at it. And this is what I'm saying. If Filoni makes it just vague enough that you can't actually extrapolate anything out of it, then anyone coming in looking to love the show will just assign whatever headcanon required so that their own interpretation of the story makes sense. It's actually kind of a foolproof way to satisfy as many people as possible in a way. Everyone is getting the story that they want to see because they're making it up as they watch it. I kind of respect the ingenuity in a way, but it makes me mourn for the days when this franchise actually bothered to tell stories with characters and cohesive plots that stand on their own. I think the worst part about this method of writing is that it actually works on a lot of people. He's cracked the formula for how to make the most crowd-pleasing show, and as long as people keep eating it up, he has no incentive to ever actually try. If you guys still don't believe me, then how about this? Can you actually explain to me what happens in this episode in terms of how Ahsoka is alive by the end? Because it's not explained anywhere in the actual show, and no matter which headcanon you employ, it doesn't actually make sense for one reason or another. Let's break this down. At the end of episode 4, she gets knocked off of a cliff and wakes up in the world between worlds. This by itself can mean one of three things. Option number 1, the fall killed her, either by hitting these massive rocks on the cliffside, sheer force of impact with the water, drowning, or all of the above, really. If this is the case, then right now she's dead, and either her lifeless body is floating in the water while her spirit is in the world between worlds, or she disappeared into the Force and is not physically on the mortal plane in any capacity. And if this is the case, then when she chooses to live, she's literally resurrected from death, which, wouldn't be the first time for her. But it's still annoying, and it should be pretty obvious what that does to the stakes. That's option 1. Option 2 is that she was falling off the cliff and Anakin reached out and pulled her into the world between worlds, saving her from what surely would have been her death. I kind of doubt this one, considering he seems to be treating it as though she might actually die here if she doesn't get her shit together, and if that's what happened, then all he really has to do is just send her back out and she'll be fine. And that's good. I would rather this option not be the correct one, because holy fuck, can you imagine introducing the concept that Anakin, from beyond the grave, can just reach into the physical world and save people from certain death anytime he wants to? The third option is that Ahsoka fell off the cliff and into the water, somehow survived the fall, and is physically in the water the entire episode while still somehow being alive. Maybe in some kind of purgatory where, like, her soul is in the world between worlds trying to survive, but her physical body is still alive. You might call this unlikely considering Hera and the other pilots spent much of the episode scanning the ocean for life signs and couldn't find Ahsoka, which would imply she's not giving off any for them to read. But the problem with that explanation is that Chopper eventually does manage to pick up Ahsoka's signature even before she ever actually leaves the world between worlds.
Chopper thinks he has something heading 323 Mark 157. Chopper says you're gonna have to get low. Pretty low as you can.
Considering the qualification that Hera has to go extremely low in order to pick her up, this implies to me that she was always down there giving off a signal, but that Chopper only just happened to pick her up now for whatever reason. And that means that she spent several hours underwater, alive, and somehow didn't simply drown while her soul was dicking around with Anakin trying to figure out if fighting was bad. And, I don't know if you guys know this, but breathing underwater is not something Ahsoka's supposed to be able to do. In fact, there's literally an arc in the Clone Wars set entirely in the oceans of Mon Cala, where she, Anakin, and Padme are wearing protective gear that allows them to breathe underwater, and presumably withstand intense amount of pressure. It is a canonical fact that can't be disputed that Ahsoka is not semi-aquatic. But then again, if the retcon details from the Rebels epilogue are anything to go by, Filoni doesn't even consider his own work canon, or at the very least not the visuals. So hey, maybe Ahsoka actually can breathe underwater, and the Clone Wars simply depicted it differently. I know I sound super pedantic here, but the ultimate point I'm getting at is no matter which way you interpret the mechanics of this episode, Ahsoka either died and came back to life, or she managed to spend several hours on end underwater while somehow not drowning. Either way, the stakes are completely obliterated because we, the audience, now understand that no matter what happens to Ahsoka, she quite literally cannot be killed. They thought the shot was so badass! She could be incinerated into atoms, and I wouldn't believe for even a second that she's actually dead. It's the Rise of Skywalker Palpatine effect all over again. But like I said, Dave really likes to hide behind ambiguity, and because a major chunk of what happens in this episode has to be headcanon just to make sense of any of it, it makes it really hard to criticize this show without fans telling you you're making up stuff to be mad about. I'm not making anything up. I'm simply stating that there's a significant lack of information, and that no matter how you try to explain the gaps, it just doesn't work.
See that? See how that doesn't work?
And that's basically all the characterization Ahsoka gets. Once we do the world between worlds stuff, she gets sent back to the land of the living, and it's treated like she's finally overcome some great challenge and become a wiser Jedi because of it. They even rip off Gandalf by giving her the white cloak because this symbolizes Ahsoka reborn, but it just doesn't work because I have no idea what she even overcame. I don't know who she was or what she felt about any given subject before episode 5, and then the manufactured conflict in that episode was vague and confusing. I guess she's been enlightened. Sure, Dave, yeah. But yeah, other than this mess, she's a total plank of wood for the rest of the show. And I don't just mean because of a lack of characterization. I mean, she has absolutely no personality at all. She doesn't emote beyond a handful of non-committal smirks. We never get to see her show off any range. It's just the same bored-looking, stoic expression meant to give off the idea that she's some wise Zen master who's super in tune with the Force. There are 2 points in this show where Sabine fucks up majorly in ways that allow the villains a significant advantage over the heroes and helps them progress in their ultimate goal in bringing back Thrawn. The first and far less offensive time is in episode 1, where she asks Ahsoka if she can take the map off the ship so she can have a quiet place to think and try to figure out how to open it. Obviously, Ahsoka refuses this request because, as she literally puts it,
this isn't just about finding Ezra. It's about preventing another war.
But then Sabine does it anyway, and Ahsoka, for some reason, doesn't go after her immediately, which gives Sabine enough time to unlock the map before she's attacked by the bad guys who injure her, steal the map, destroy all records the heroes have from it, and fuck off. By the start of episode 2, the heroes are up a creek with no leads on how to find the bad guys, and Sabine has just handed them the key to finding Thrawn. You'd think Ahsoka would be furious with her, but you'd be dead wrong. To be fair to the show, it does seem like they are saying she is mad at Sabine here. She's just trying to keep her cool about it, which comes across as her not giving a fuck. I think that's what this line is supposed to indicate.
You need my help.
No. You've done enough.
And indeed, throughout the episode, it seems like Sabine feels as though Ahsoka isn't happy with her, and Hera is kinda trying to talk her into giving Sabine another chance. But if any of that was actually intended by this episode, they did a bad job showing it. Call it a fault with the directing, but regardless, it just wasn't a good idea to try to make Ahsoka this zen, always composed sage character who never gives into her emotions and is always extremely calm and collected. Because that's just never who she was, and it's a total waste of Rosario Dawson to make her portray the character in that way, because I know she can act. From a writing standpoint, it could actually be really interesting if Ahsoka is doing this as sort of an overcorrection because she's afraid of becoming like Anakin. Maybe she fears that if she gives into her emotions, she'll succumb to the dark side just like he did, so she'd rather keep them bottled up and put on this facade of someone who never gets phased. But of course, if that's what they were going for, you'd then need to actually show the cracks. You'd have to set up that that's what's happening through subtle acting and directing, and it would have to come to a breaking point at some point in the story. It would have to be something she eventually learns to stop doing, and she would grow to embrace these emotions. But none of that ever happens in the show. The second fuck up from Sabine is far more egregious, and again, if you wanted to make it so that Ahsoka's calm composure is a mask hiding barely restrained, bottled up emotions, this would have been the perfect time to bring all that to the forefront. So at the end of episode 4, Sabine is in a position where she can destroy the map and prevent the bad guys from ever finding Thrawn, but that would also mean losing Ezra forever. So instead, she chooses to give it to Baylan and strikes a deal with him that she'll be taken alive and get to see him again. This is a decision that I take massive issue with in terms of what it does for Sabine's character, and we're gonna get to all that. But it really does go hand in hand with Ahsoka, because this choice is completely unforgivable. Sabine has just doomed the entire galaxy to be once again subjugated by a resurgent empire, the same empire against which she fought for so many years of her life and whose horrors she's seen firsthand, all so that she has a chance to see Ezra again. This is an extremely selfish decision that has no regard for the people that Ahsoka is supposedly fighting to protect. She should be furious. But the next time they see each other, she doesn't bring it up and doesn't seem to be upset with her in any way, which is then reinforced in the following episode when they have a heart-to-heart and talk about it. Ahsoka basically tells her, yeah, shit happens, but it's cool. And that's literally it. All is forgiven, even though her mistake has still yet to be rectified, and by the end of the show, Thrawn successfully gets away and leaves them stranded in another galaxy. And he couldn't have done it without Sabine, so let's everyone give her a big ol' round of applause. Remember how like 3 episodes ago, Ahsoka's entire inner conflict was about the legacy she leads and what she and Sabine might become if they continue to fight? Hey, remember even just one scene ago when Huyang explicitly says the reason Ahsoka stopped training Sabine is because she was afraid of what she would become? Wouldn't it be interesting if there was another character that Ahsoka knows very well who doomed the entire galaxy in order to be with the one they love most? Wouldn't that be an interesting parallel to draw from that feeds into their conflict? Well, we can't have that because that would require literally any conflict between these characters, and for some fucking reason, that's just not allowed. We wouldn't want our drama series to have any drama between the two main characters. That would be ridiculous. Also, the scene continues by having Ahsoka say this.
Over the years, I've made my share of difficult choices. Often no one understood my reasons, except my master. He always stood by me, even when no one else did.
And cute reference to that one Clone Wars arc and all, but this is just an absolutely absurd justification for her forgiving Sabine. You know, somehow I don't think Anakin would have been all that thrilled with Ahsoka if she'd handed Count Dooku the means to conquer the entire galaxy. I don't think he would have stood by her then. This line just feels like Filoni trying to justify why Ahsoka would be so quick to forgive, but it just doesn't work, because none of the mistakes Ahsoka made were anywhere near as severe as what Sabine did, and at at least when she fucked up, she had the decency to feel bad about it. Sabine doesn't ever come to truly realize what she's done, aside from some very minor feelings of guilt.
Sorry. No.
And that's thanks in large part to the fact that she gets away with it without even a fucking slap on the wrist. Which I guess means it's time to talk about Sabine. If you guys couldn't already tell, I'm none too happy with what she pulled at the end of episode 4, nor do I like how none of the characters ever meaningfully address it or call it out for the abomination that it was. Well, no one except for Thrawn, but the show itself tried to frame that scene like Sabine was in the right, and that Thrawn just can't possibly understand what it means to love someone so much that he would sacrifice everything for them.
You've gambled the fate of your galaxy on that belief.
You wouldn't understand.
Perhaps not.
So I guess we should probably talk about it. Do I think it was within character for Sabine Wren to doom the entire galaxy just for a chance at finding Ezra? No. Absolutely not. And this isn't me trying to use moralism to criticize the show. I'm fine with hero characters making selfish decisions at the second act low point. I just actually do not believe that this is something Sabine would ever do. She spent years of her life fighting against the Empire, seeing firsthand the kinds of atrocities they were capable of, and even bearing witness to what happens when you hand the Empire the means for mass destruction. We saw her experience the personal consequences of her own actions for giving the Empire an advantage against her people. And now you want me to believe that she would allow them to come back in full force with Thrawn at the helm? The same Thrawn who killed and tortured several people that she cared about and who nearly wiped out the rebellion in one fell swoop at the Battle of Adelon? The man who was willing to bombard the entire city of Lethal's capital just to extort Ezra into surrendering? No, sorry, I just don't believe Sabine would ever allow that to happen, not even to see Ezra again, as much as she may love and miss him. And I know her actual biological family was apparently killed off screen, but I'm not a fan of this idea the show tries to put forward, that Sabine believes Ezra is the only family she has left.
I know you feel that Ezra Bridger is the only family you have left. I know that's what's holding you back.
I guess Hera and Zeb can just go fuck themselves. I guess Jason doesn't matter to her either. All she cares about is Ezra, so fuck the rest of the galaxy, right? No, I'm sorry, just no. Sabine was thoroughly assassinated in this show, and then her faults were never meaningfully explored, so fuck all of that. Hashtag not my Sabine. I don't know that I would say Hera was also completely assassinated, but she was at the very least extremely damaged for taking her child into what she knew would be a battlefield. The likelihood that she would be shot at was very high, and she took a 10-year-old boy right into the fold. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but even Kenobi understood that children that young aren't supposed to be in dangerous situations if it can be helped. This was literally the entire premise of that show. Are you seriously making me point to Kenobi as an example of something done right? And we can potentially throw Zeb onto the pyre too, considering he's nowhere to be found in this search for Ezra. Again, this takes place pretty soon after Mando Season 3, meaning he'd still be on a Delphi base with Carson Teva, who follows Hera into this mission. Oh, what's that? Zeb was off training recruits?
Zeb's training recruits.
I guess that means he turned his cell phone off for an entire week and Hera was unable to get a hold of him, because otherwise there's no way he's missing out on the possible chance of finding Ezra. So Sabine's assassinated and Hera and Zeb are severely damaged. Are there any Rebels characters who make it out of this show unscathed?
Not likely.
The thing is, people like to say that this is a show for those who are a fan of the animated series. If you're a casual viewer who's only seen the films, even if you've kept up with the Mandoverse, you're not going to understand a lot of this show. You're going to see shit like the space whales and the world between worlds, and if you somehow don't find that stuff ridiculous, you're still not going to understand what any of it means. Nor are you going to know who any of these characters are, or what they mean to each other, so watching Sabine and Hera talk about wanting to find Ezra is just going to make you go, yeah, I mean, I guess he probably does mean something to them. I don't know. I haven't seen their dynamic ever. But if this is a show for the hardcore fans who have been following these characters for years, then I take issue with that premise. As someone who loves Rebels and is hugely attached to all of its main characters, I don't understand how you can like that show and not feel anything other than complete and utter contempt for the Ahsoka series. It horribly damages all of them. It turns Thrawn into a fucking idiot, which we'll get into in a bit. And the reunions between Ezra, Hera, and Sabine are all completely vapid. They like any emotional weight. Considering this entire show is supposed to be about finding Ezra, and considering what Sabine did in order to get to him, you'd think that when they finally do see each other for the first time in 10 years, they'd be crying and running toward each other, hugging one another so tightly, never wanting to let go. But instead they're like, oh, hey, as if they saw each other last Thursday and it's no big deal. I'm not asking for fanfare here, I'm asking for the climax of Sabine's journey to have any impact whatsoever. And the same goes for his reunion with Hera, who was basically his mother during his most formative years, and who brought out the best she knew he could be, setting an example for what's right and giving him a home when he was lost and alone. He showed up after a fucking decade, and it's the same hollow, unengaging horseshit devoid of anything even resembling substance. I mean, he literally goes in for a hug, and it transitions to a new scene before we even see it.
What? Why? Why would we do this? That sounds like not a good idea.
You can't make this shit up. But getting back to specifically focusing on Sabine, I'd like to finally talk about the fact that she is now apparently a Jedi, and I want to take a look both at the world-breaking mechanics introduced in that, as well as how this services her character. And I want to talk briefly about the way fans of the show have defended what they do here, mainly because I find it funny, but also to highlight a larger point. So let's lay this out. Originally, when one of the later trailers released, it heavily alluded to the idea that Sabine was apparently being trained as a Jedi.
You never made things easy for me, Master.
And obviously, a lot of people took issue with that because, Sabine's not force sensitive. And I remember that the defenses at the time were, they haven't confirmed it yet, stop jumping to conclusions, yada yada yada. But then the show came out and that defense no longer worked because they were making it pretty clear that, no, Sabine is force sensitive, and they were clearly setting her up to eventually master telekinesis. So then the defense had to change, and fans started scrambling for any line from the original films they could find to try and pretend like this has always been how it worked. Obi-Wan says the force resides in all living things, so that means anyone can become a Jedi if they train hard enough, even though the show itself didn't seem to be fully committing to that yet because, again, Dave likes to hide behind ambiguity.
Force resides in all living things, even you.
If that's true, then why doesn't everyone use it?
Talent is a factor.
Oh, so in other words, you either have it or you don't. No matter which way you look at it, this really doesn't work for a myriad of reasons. Either Sabine has no significant force sensitivity, as Hu Yang seemed to allude to early on in the show.
I have known many Padawans over the centuries, and I can safely say your aptitude for the Force would fall short of them all.
In which case, what's the fucking point of training her to be a Jedi to begin with? Or she is force sensitive, enough to be able to do this. In which case, how the fuck did neither Kanan nor Ezra ever sense that within her? They lived with her for years, fought beside her constantly, trained her in lightsaber combat, and they never once felt even the smallest inkling of force sensitivity within her? Really? People are trying to say that they did, and that that's supported by various lines in Rebels, which is definitely not true considering Ezra's reaction to finding out Sabine was training as a Jedi in this show.
Ahsoka took me on as her apprentice.
She what? Why? I mean, congratulations. Really?
Go on.
No, that's great. Makes sense, of course.
But even if it was, I would then just ask why Kanan never decided to take her on as a Padawan too. Is he sexist? Did he offer it to her and she just said nah? So if it's just that Sabine specifically has always been force sensitive and somehow Kanan and Ezra never did anything about it, then that still doesn't make any sense, but I guess it doesn't completely break everything. However, that's clearly not what the show is going for. They really do seem to be trying to imply that every living being has an intrinsic connection to the Force that allows them to become a Jedi if they try hard enough, which makes me wonder a few things. It makes me wonder why someone like Chirrut Imwe, a devout follower of the Force his entire life, was only able to use the Force to a limited extent for things like seeing without sight or sensing the intentions of others. We never see him use it for anything as advanced as telekinesis. It's almost like there's a finite amount of connection to the Force that any given person has, and once they reach their full potential, they can't go any further. I know people like to shit on midichlorians for demystifying the Force or whatever, but at least that allowed for a better understanding of who can and can't have access to these powers, powers, as well as put a cap on how far said powers can take someone. You can't use the Force to solve all your problems, because even if you're extremely powerful, there are still limits to what you can do. The bigger question this raises, though, is that if anyone can be trained in the ways of the Force and master Jedi-like abilities by sheer willpower and discipline, then how are there not entire armies of Force sensitives by now, enforcing the wills of whoever might want to make a play for galactic dominance? I mean, surely that kind of thing would be part of the brainwashing and conditioning process of every First Order stormtrooper, no? They're already snatched away from their homes as children and forced to become hardened soldiers. Why wouldn't Snoke want them carrying out his will with as much power as they can possibly muster? The excuse that anyone can become a Jedi because the Force resides in all living things is such a stretch that I actually struggle to understand the lengths some fans will go to defend this show. See, I always understood that to mean that life and the Force have a symbiotic relationship and that neither can exist without the other. You know, kind of like the films literally tell us.
The Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
For my ally is the Force, and a powerful ally it is. Life creates it, makes it grow.
Midi-chlorians are a microscopic life form that resides within all living cells, and we are symbionts with them. Life forms living together for mutual advantage. Without the midi-chlorians, life could not exist.
Not that simply by having the Force inside you, you can become a Jedi if you give it your all. So yeah, the long and short of it is that Sabine being Force sensitive doesn't make a lick of sense and causes significant world building issues. And it would be one thing if this was done to facilitate some kind of character arc, but I really can't think of a single reason why Sabine needed to be a Jedi. Her story would have been exactly the same otherwise. The only thing that really changes is that she doesn't get to be used as fuel for Ahsoka's random fear about her legacy, which didn't even amount to anything anyway, like we already went over. There are multiple moments throughout the show setting up the eventual payoff that Sabine will use the Force, and then in the finale she finally does. And I think because he employed very basic setup and payoff, Dave thinks this was some kind of an arc, but in terms of her internal struggle, I have absolutely no idea what she overcame to get to this point. I don't know how she's grown. What was stopping her from doing this before? Was it self-doubt? If so, what caused her to finally believe in herself? And why is it that the second she unlocks this power, she's able to use it as proficiently as any other Jedi who's been training for years? And let's talk about the Mandalorian Purge, shall we? No matter which show we're talking about in this godforsaken shared universe, it always seems to circle back to this abomination of a writing choice, doesn't it? Mandalore is obviously a huge part of Sabine's story. It's her home planet, the foundation for her culture, and the place where her family lives. Lived. Going into the show, I was holding my breath to see how they would handle the fact that it got destroyed by the Empire off-screen after she fought so hard to defend it. Did she abandon Lothal and her promise to Ezra in order to try to save it? Like I said earlier, the show doesn't really give us that much information about what exactly happened, but this is what we do know. Huyang says,
"At the end of the war, the Empire purged the entire surface of the planet, killing hundreds of thousands."
Which I guess would imply that the purge happened sometime after Return of the Jedi. I always assumed it happened during or right before the OT, but either way, we know that Sabine had already been training under Ahsoka for a nebulous amount of time before the purge happened, and that is what caused Ahsoka to abandon her after she became worried that she was training to be a Jedi for the wrong reasons. And again, we don't really have that many details here, but apparently Sabine's entire family died because Ahsoka didn't trust her, yet like I said, she doesn't really seem to hold that against her. And I want to expand on that point a little because remember how in Rebels she had an entire arc where she ran from her home because she didn't think she was welcome, and then she returned because the Rebels needed help from the Mandalorians to fight the Empire? She had spent so many years running, feeling like her family would never forgive her for the things she did, but she finally came home to help put things right and began patching things up with them. Now Mandalore is gone, at least as far as she knows, and so is her family, which is apparently all because of Ahsoka, and yet she doesn't give a single shit. This goes beyond just hating her. She should want her fucking dead. And again, it just feels like the show is afraid to generate any drama between the two main characters, but these people would have so much more to say to each other than anything we get. Wasted potential doesn't even begin to put it into words. They fucking ruined these characters. And Ahsoka and Sabine are basically the only ones who get anything, really. Every other character has the same issue of not having any clear motivations or development. argument. Even the characters with goals that I know about don't make any sense, because we're never told why they want the things that they want. Why does Morgan want to restore the Empire with Thrawn at the helm? Hell, why the fuck does Thrawn want that? I know Dave Filoni is scared of reading, but these books are canon, and they tell us that Thrawn always viewed his service to the Empire as a means to an end, to help protect his own people from a potential threat in the unknown regions. He doesn't actually give a shit if Palpatine sits on some throne on Coruscant. Why would he care at all about helping the scattered and beaten Imperial remnant reclaim power in a galactic political sphere that he doesn't have any connection to? Are they gonna help the Chiss defeat the Grisk? He's also a complete fucking idiot in this show, which is, you know, not optimal for any main villain in a story, but especially not when the character in question's entire shtick is being really, really smart. Like, everyone keeps acting like if Thrawn comes back, the New Republic is done for because he'll galvanize the Imperial remnant and use his superior intellect to conquer the galaxy, and then we meet him and he's a fucking buffoon. All of his plans fail except for the very end, and even then his dumbass was almost prevented from escaping, despite having ample opportunity to leave before the heroes even arrived. Like, seriously, the episode began with his men telling him the cargo transfer was complete, which already was a stupid plot device to force him to stick around as long as he did, and then instead of immediately leaving, he just stood around the entire episode waiting for Ahsoka to show up and potentially thwart him. But that's putting to one side that every single time he conducts a battle in this show, his forces completely fail because his strategy consists of, I don't know, fight the Jedi, I guess, and then when Morgan questions him, he's like, nah, it's fine, don't worry about it. It's all part of the plan.
A successful strike on the Jedi shuttle was reported before we lost contact with the flight group.
An acceptable outcome. These are unfortunate, but acceptable losses given the absence of Lord Balin. In the grand scheme of things, one might even call this first match with Tano a success.
I know people like to meme on Rebels Thrawn for doing that a lot, but in that show, him allowing the Rebels small victories here and there actually did play a role in a larger game. Every acceptable loss was in the service of figuring out who Fulcrum is and learning the location of the Rebel base so that he could wipe them out completely, instead of just capturing or killing one small Rebel cell. He's supposed to be some great battle tactician, but I can guarantee with confidence that the Thrawn in this show would not be able to beat my 10-year-old brother in a game of checkers. But the absolute dumbest thing about Thrawn in this series is that he somehow never managed to find Ezra after 10 whole years of them being stranded on this planet together. It's not like in Rebels, where Ezra and his crew would strike at various Imperial outposts from an unknown location that could be literally anywhere in an entire galaxy. They are on one planet that's barely even populated, and Ezra isn't even trying very hard to hide. He has a camp by the lake. They move around in broad daylight and travel as a bunch. They are not hard to find. Do life scanners not exist? Some people tried to argue that Thrawn wouldn't even bother trying to find Ezra because he's barely even a threat, which would be pretty stupid considering the reason he's stranded on Peridia in the first place is because he underestimated Ezra. I somehow doubt he's going to make that mistake again.
There is little the Jedi can do to stop us now.
I've watched many an Imperial officer make the same assumptions about the rebellion. Even I fell victim to the heroics of a single Jedi. Never again.
But we also know that that's not even true, because the only reason Sabine found him was through intel that Thrawn gave her.
You shall have provisions, amounts, and our latest intel on Bridger's whereabouts.
Thrawn was actively looking for Ezra and had decent enough intel on where he was to the point where Sabine was able to find him within a day, and Ezra is making no effort whatsoever to hide his massive camp of rock turtle people. And if none of that was enough, we later learned that the Night Sisters have the power to locate Force-sensitive people with their magic, like they do when Ahsoka is hiding in the planet's ring. Maybe they can only do it when the target is using the Force, but in that case, I guess we're accepting that Ezra never used the Force at any point over 10 years? My god, Thrawn is an idiot. How did he never manage to find and kill him? What if Morgan had shown up with her big hyperspace ring to take him away and Ezra used the space whales to stop his escape again? And you know, one One thing that I find personally annoying is that the dynamic between Ezra and Thrawn in this show, which doesn't even really exist if we're honest, is one of the least creative directions you could have taken this story in. Ever since the Rebels finale came out, I've come up with so many different ways you could explore this. Where did they end up? What sort of technology did they have to work with? Were whatever natives they ran into hostile or advanced enough technologically to help them get home or to pose as a serious threat against them? What if they had to team up to deal with a greater threat and maybe they developed a reluctant bond and understanding of one another? Maybe they wound up in the unknown regions and Ezra got to see where Thrawn was from and what he was fighting against that caused him to join the Empire. Maybe Ezra's found a new purpose, like a family or a cause that he believes in, so that maybe when Sabine finally gets to him, she would realize that he's moved on, and that would service her own arc in moving past the guilt she's felt for all these years because she stood by and let Ezra go face Thrawn when she could have tried to stop him.
You missed the ceremony.
Was that yesterday? It slipped my mind.
You were missed, Sabine. Everyone was there.
Not everyone.
You really could do anything you want. The potential was practically limitless. But instead, when we find them, Thrawn is in a position of power with an army of stormtroopers at his back, and Ezra is running and hiding, ever the rebel against the tyrant. Nothing has changed. Nothing new or interesting was done with this. Imagine if Morgan had spent all this time trying to get to Thrawn so that he could galvanize the Imperial remnant, only for him to disappoint her with the fact that he doesn't actually care about the Empire and she's wasted her time. Wouldn't it be great if the villains had some fucking nuance? Oh, and don't even get me started on Baylan. He spent the entire series vague posting on Maine, giving unhelpful exposition dumps to Shin about his ultimate goal, which it feels like she should already know given that they've been with each other for decades, but whatever. He's a mystery box, plain and simple. Never give away anything that might actually tell us anything about him. We gotta save the big reveal for the very end of the season, and then never follow up on that storyline in whatever continuation this show gets, because unfortunately, Ray Stevenson passed away earlier this year, so that's fucking great. Baylan is one of the most frustrating characters in recent memory because he had the potential to be actually really interesting. He constantly talks about trying to break some kind of historic cycle. He implies that he's searching for power, but not in the typical sense that most villains in this franchise mean. I really liked that when he gave Sabine his word that her life would be spared and she would be able to see Ezra again, he actually kept it, even as Shin tried to kill her. It wasn't much, but this little moment added actual depth to his character. That is, of course, discounting episode 6, where turns out it was all a ruse, and he actually only intended to let Sabine find Ezra so they could kill him. That's great. Now, for a second there, Dave, you'd actually managed to assign someone a character trait, and of course we can't have that, so glad you nipped that one in the bud. Like, if you want to argue that he never actually intended to renege on the deal and that it was Thrawn who ordered him to go after Sabine, he could have just refused. He doesn't actually work for Thrawn, and he doesn't have to do what he says if he doesn't want to. This could have even built up some friction between the villains and lent credence to the thing they were trying to do, where Thrawn doesn't entirely trust Baylan. Again, it would be really nice if the villains had any nuance whatsoever. Baylan also told Shin that he trained her to be something more than a Jedi, which seemed to imply that she had a purpose and that she would factor into his ultimate goals in some way, and maybe even provide some insights on desperately needed information, like who they are to each other, how he found her, and why he decided to train her. But then in the very next episode, he's just like, yeah, fuck it, you go do your thing, see you in hell. And that's it. He fucks off. That's it. That's just it. He just fucking leaves. This scene is so weird because it came completely out of nowhere. It wasn't set up at all. And neither was Shin's apparent ambition to take her place in the new empire, which Baylan states as the reason they have to split. She literally isn't a character and hasn't been fleshed out at all, so I guess if the show is telling me that's what she wants, who am I to question it? It's just yet another moment of Dave hiding behind the vague idea of character work so that you can't really say anything definitive about it one way or another, but it's nonetheless frustrating. I mean, God, you'd think she would see him as basically her father, right? I'm assuming she's been following him since she was a child and that he raised her in a time when having the Force was not very popular. You'd think she'd have some kind of reaction to him completely abandoning her. Anything at all? No? Alright, I guess that was that scene. Moving on, I suppose of all the Rebels characters, Ezra wasn't completely damaged. There was that one weird bit with him refusing to use a lightsaber in episode 7, which sparked a lot of stupid arguments online and once again forced fans of the show to pull anything they could think of from the films to try to pretend it makes any sense. I'm not even gonna get that much into it because I really shouldn't have to explain why having a lightsaber is obviously a good idea in a situation where multiple people are shooting at you. I mean, hell, Ezra and Sabine almost die because they get surrounded by stormtroopers and he isn't even armed. The go-to defense for this was that he didn't want to be violent because it's not the Jedi way or some bullshit. Like, people tried to argue that the Jedi using lightsabers is a bad thing because lightsabers are used to inflict violence. They completely twisted the whole "my ally is the Force" line from Yoda to mean that a truly wise Jedi Master has no need for such an archaic weapon. And yeah, as long as you ignore basic nuance, I'm sure you can stretch it to mean whatever you want it to mean. But the real point of having a lightsaber is so a Jedi can defend themselves and others in situations where lives are at stake. This does not mean Jedi should or do go looking for fights, but sometimes they happen, and it's okay to use whatever means necessary to defuse the situation, even if it means chopping off a limb or two, or yes, even taking a life. That is the responsibility of the Guardians of Peace and Justice. The simple truth is that this is a cope argument used to defend Ezra's decision. But the thing is, Filoni has proven himself incapable of actually understanding Star Wars with even the most basic media literacy.
Well, Grogu definitely trained with a Jedi.
He trained when he was young, right?
And also
However,
with
Luke trained, and then Yoda didn't confirm that he was a Jedi. Remember, he says, "Oh, you think you're a Jedi? You're not so fast."
But then he also said,
he had to pass his
when
trials.
you're gone, you'll be the last Jedi.
When I'm gone.
I'm gone.
So it's interesting. It's like,
so if you were to tell me that the reason this scene was written the way it is because he himself misunderstood what "my ally is the Force" actually means, I would believe you. This does not make it a good excuse. All it does is highlight just how well and truly fucked this franchise is if these are the hands it's in. But like I was getting at, you can't even make that defense since he was still employing the Force in a violent manner, and even resorted to using a blaster when he realized that obviously he can't defeat all the stormtroopers just with the power of positive thinking. And besides, this whole argument was immediately rendered pointless in the very next episode when he constructed a lightsaber and proceeded to use it throughout the entire rest of the show. He killed several people with it indiscriminately because obviously it's worth killing a few people in order to prevent another galactic war, and any true Jedi would be willing to do that under these circumstances. Please stop coping, guys. I mean it. I'm not trying to be a dick here. It's not an indictment on your credibility as a fan or as someone who employs critical thinking just because a show you like might have a few flaws. You do not have to defend everything. The other issues I have with Ezra are that he didn't really react at all to the news of what happened to Mandalore, nor does he press Sabine on how exactly she got to Peridia when she very clearly doesn't want to tell him. Like, he seems to figure out pretty much immediately that her being here can only mean something bad, and then she subverts the question, implying she did something really fucked up, and then he just drops it and never tries to pry it out of her at any point beyond, "Hey, by the way, how exactly are you here? Don't worry about it." Okay, sure thing. Also, can we, leave? Now that I'm thinking about it, isn't it just so wonderful that Ezra's sacrifice at the end of Rebels meant absolutely nothing? It was the culmination of his entire arc throughout the show, becoming someone who's willing to give up everything in order to do what's right, as Kanan and his parents both taught him through example. He gave up his life, his freedom, and a chance at ever seeing the people he cares about again to save a planet that he knew he'd never again step foot on. Because that's what heroes do. That's what Jedi do.
You could have chosen to let your people die. However, you chose to be a Jedi.
But now Thrawn's back, the Empire is making a big return, and all of that was for nothing. All he did was just delay it a little bit. And it's all thanks to Sabine. She gave Thrawn the key to galactic conquest just for a chance to see the person who, if he knew what she'd done, would be absolutely furious with her. But he never finds out, because I guess Dave realized he'd either have to commit to having Sabine be reprimanded for her heinous actions, or completely butcher Ezra along with the rest of the characters in order to bend the narrative so that Sabine is a fucking saint. because we all know Dave would never do anything to damage these characters. Oh fuck, I have been so focused on the characters, I haven't even really talked about the world building all that much, but it's at its absolute worst here. The world has never been more broken than it is right now, so let's start out with the small stuff. As usual for this stupid fucking Mandoverse, the New Republic are corrupt, ineffectual morons whose heads are so far up their own asses they can't see the Imperial threat right in front of them, not even when there is undeniable, irrefutable evidence that some facet of the Empire with significant ties to the most prominent shipbuilding planet in the galaxy is working on some big secret project. This absolute dog's breakfast of a scene tries to paint it as though the senators don't believe Hera because they have no evidence, which is horseshit, and because they know she has a personal reason to want to devote resources into a futile search for Thrawn. But it doesn't matter if they don't believe Thrawn is alive. There is still more than enough proof that the Imperial Remnant are up to something big, and that's more than enough to send an entire fleet to go check it out. I mean, they act like they can't spare any ships, but then when Hera breaks protocol to look into this herself, they send 3 entire cruisers just to arrest her. You could spare those ships to arrest a general in your military, but not to investigate a very likely threat to the sanctity of everyone you're meant to serve? Fuck you. I don't even know why Mon Mothma would choose senators this inept to be in her inner circle, making big decisions about where defense resources should go to combat a threat that they apparently don't even believe exists anymore. They have the power to veto her own authority. How does she expect to get anything done in building a new world order if she has a bunch of idiots constantly undermining her at every turn? Why is any of this happening? Speaking of the New Republic, it's eventually revealed to us that Leia is fully aware of everything going on and in full support of what Hera's doing, yet for some reason none of the OT characters have decided to get involved to stop the potential threat of the Empire's return. Luke already should have been called the second that lightsaber-wielding Empire affiliates showed up on scene and broke a valuable prisoner out of New Republic custody, but even just assuming he was running late to the debriefing Hera gave Ahsoka, where is he for the entirety of this show? Is he not at all invested in making sure the Empire he nearly died to bring down stays gone? People are gonna say I'm asking for fan service when I've previously criticized needlessly injecting Luke in stories where he doesn't belong, but that's not it at all. I frankly don't want to see Luke ever again, because I know Disney will just ruin him even further. Plus, they're scared of recasting because Solo bombed, and I'm none too keen on seeing any more of this CGI monstrosity masquerading around as Luke Skywalker. But the thing is, with everything that's going on, Luke, Han, Leia, Chewie, all the heroes from the OT would be involved in this story. You have to actually give us a reason why Luke can't show up. What is he doing that is more important than preventing the return of the last Imperial Grand Admiral? I'll laugh at you if you tell me he's training students. But again, the New Republic being terrible is old news at this point, and there are much worse things to talk about in terms of world building. I'm not going to go too deep into this because my friend the Jolly Chap is working on his own video breaking down the subject better than I ever could, but let me give you a brief rundown for why hyperspace travel is now completely broken by this show. And I don't definitively know how hyperspace works. I'm not a physicist, and I'm not going to try to pretend to be some kind of authority, but basically what we're shown in the Star Wars films and shows is that hyperspace is a higher dimension that is, for the purposes of putting it simply, smaller than regular space, which allows you to travel to different points in space much faster while covering far less distance than you would in real space. There is no mass in hyperspace, but because the space that you're now traveling through is severely condensed, pockets of gravity are much harder to navigate around, and the force they have hasn't changed, so if you fly too close to one, you'll be pulled back into real space. We even see this in Rebels when the Empire use an artificial gravity well to pull a Rebel cruiser back into real space. This is the reason why hyperspace routes exist. You have to have a path set to make sure you move through space without running into something with a strong gravitational pull. But theoretically, if you were able to create a hyperdrive ring powerful enough to move so quickly through hyperspace that it can travel the distance between galaxies within days, as is clearly shown to be the case here, then factors like gravity stop mattering altogether. You could essentially brute force your way past any spatial obstacles short of anything other than maybe a black hole, and even then that's not a guarantee. You can forget about traveling to other galaxies. This is basically the key to instant teleportation to anywhere in the main galaxy, because you no longer have to worry about hyperspace routes. You can basically go anywhere you want to go, coming from any direction, and not have to worry about any obstacles in your path. And you can travel that distance exponentially faster. The show tells us that this ring is capable of doing this with with only 7 hyperdrive engines, which is entirely feasible to get a hold of in a galaxy where ships are mass-produced by the thousands, most of which being equipped with standard hyperdrive engines. So now we know that the Empire had both the means and the know-how to essentially teleport anywhere in the galaxy. Can you imagine what they might be able to do with that technology on something like, say, the Death Star? And even if the Empire somehow didn't have it then, they obviously do now, so I expect this power to be used to its fullest effect in whatever follow-up we get. Like I said, go watch Jolly's video if you want a full breakdown of just how much this fucks with, but the basic idea is that they've just told us the Empire had the means of crushing their enemies with ease, and yet we're still supposed to believe the rebels had any actual chance of ever winning the war, because I guess they were just too stupid to put those resources to proper use. I cannot stress enough that this moment right here is infinitely more world-breaking than the Holdo maneuver in episode 8. Link to Jolly's video in the description. Which brings me to the Night Sisters. And for those of you who don't know, I've spent the entirety of this year working on a massive Clone Wars video, so I've already had my fair share of these stupid motherfucking witches. I don't think they're well implemented into the canon of that show either, and it's beyond me that more people don't have a problem with them, because their magic system is fucking OP and seems to be limitless in potential. You don't even have to be force sensitive to become powerful, according to this line from Talzin in season 6.
It may help you to know, however, that I am not the natural force wielder like the Jedi or Sith. I use dark magic to achieve power.
The abilities of Night Sisters include, but are not limited to, access to a crystal ball that allows you to know the exact location of anyone in the galaxy that you're thinking of, even down to their exact planetary location, invisibility, voodoo, with seemingly no limit to how far it can reach the subject in question, insanity erasure TM, the ability to literally become intangible at will and prevent people from physically attacking you or allowing you to move through solid objects like walls, whatever the fuck this is. Raising an army of zombies, we'll circle back to that in a moment, and a whole other host of absolutely world-breaking powers. Now, there's an episode in season 6 where Talzin seems to conjure a sword out of thin air, and that's what I originally interpreted that as. That would imply that the Night Sisters have the power to manifest matter out of actual nothing, which has its own laundry list of world-breaking implications by itself, but I no longer think that that's what happened there, given some added context from the Ahsoka finale, and I think this new interpretation might actually be worse. In the finale, we see the Night Sisters conjure what seems to be the same sword.
The blade of Talzin.
As a gift for Morgan, implying that they have the power to teleport matter from anywhere in all of space just by thinking about it. And wouldn't it be weird if the entire show was contingent on these specific characters trying to get Thrawn back over to the main galaxy so that he can galvanize the Imperial Remnant? Wouldn't it just break the entire point of this narrative if they had the ability to teleport between galaxies? People are saying it's just the sword they can do that with. What the fuck are you talking about? Where are you getting that from? Because it's not in the show. Just because the sword is the only thing explicitly being shown to teleport doesn't mean it's the only item that can. Why would that even be how that works? Like, it's just a sword. Even if it's imbued with some kind of magical incantations that allow it to teleport when summoned, who do you think gave it that power? If the Night Sisters can enchant a sword to teleport, why can't they do that with other objects? Why not even a person? Why not themselves? The show isn't establishing any rules for how any of this works, and the information we do have tells us that teleportation is a thing that was possible, so I don't understand why we had to do any of this to get Thrawn home. Night Sisters are such a stupid concept that should never have been introduced. And remember how I said they can create zombies? Yeah, we saw that in the Clone Wars at one point, and now here it is again for our big epic finale. The leaks were right, guys. They really wanted to make Thrawn the Night King, but in space, because that's so cool. I love how Ahsoka, Ezra, and Sabine take out all these stormtroopers, but then instead of immediately advancing further, they just kind of stand around for no reason, allowing for the dramatic shot of the zombie stormtroopers rising from the dead and catching them all by surprise. Now, something that fans keep trying to do is defend this show with the excuse that the stupid shit that happens in it was introduced somewhere else. This has happened with the space whales, even though this show arguably made them a lot stupider and more world-breaking than they ever were in Rebels. They did that with the World Between Worlds, and they've done that here with the zombies. It happened in the Clone Wars, so it must be fine. As if a stupid concept existing for enough time suddenly makes it okay. We accepted it then, so why can't we accept it now?
We?
Who's we? There is no we.
And look, I'm not entirely against the idea of zombies in any capacity. I just think you have to be careful with how you handle it, and this show doesn't care nearly enough to deal with these concepts with any grace. If we're accepting the existence of witches with all these fantastical powers, which I'm really not, then I'm happy for them to be able to use some form of necromancy to raise corpses from their graves and puppeteer them around. But there's a big difference between that and the zombies actually being alive. This show muddies the waters heavily on whether or not these zombies have agency. The stormtroopers that stay behind to fight the Jedi have apparently done so voluntarily, as is literally confirmed moments earlier in the same episode.
Those are the volunteers. They were made aware.
They were. All were honored to make the sacrifice.
We don't know for a fact that they were already zombies before volunteering, though we see later that there are other stormtroopers who were already zombies and clearly had been for some time given the rate at which they decayed as shown here. So if the troopers who volunteered were still alive, why would they be the first line of defense against Ahsoka instead of the ones who were already undead? And why is this a question I'm even having to ask? What the fuck happened to Star Wars? Also, what was Merrick's whole deal? Yes, I'm calling him Merrick, fuck you. Motherfucker exploded into gas when he died, implying he was also a zombie? I mean, some fans argued that he could have just gotten the Savage treatment since Savage also had green mist flowing out of him when he died. But remember how the magic that turned him also made him, like, really buff? Like, he was already a pretty big dude, but he was a fucking Hulk by the time the Night Sisters were done with him. Merrick just looks like a normal guy with an average build. He's not even particularly tall. Was this like a Steve Rogers situation where, like, he was really scrawny before he took the super soldier serum? I think the simplest explanation is that he was a zombie, and that fucks with a lot considering he was able to walk, talk, and think like a normal person.
Rock, form up on my wing and wait for my signal.
Guys, I can go on all day about why this show is bad, but this video is getting to be, quite long on its own, so I'll cap it off with this. Ahsoka should have died on Malachor. The fact of the matter is she was never supposed to live past the Clone Wars, and Lucas wanted her dead by the time of Revenge of the Sith. Filoni found a loophole to subvert that by having her walk away from the Order so that she wouldn't be present for Order 66. I mean, she ended up being present for it anyway, so I'm not really sure what the point of that was, but the point is, Filoni has a special attachment to this character, and he didn't want to let her go. And I mean, I'm not going to pretend I don't understand why. Dave has been at Lucasfilm for a while now, and in that time, he's had a lot of OCs, but none quite like this one, because this one was his first. Sure, she was conceptualized by George, and George ultimately decided on stuff like her name and everything like that, but she's still Dave's baby, and she entered the Star Wars world at the same time as him back in 2008. His debut as a creative behind the Clone Wars coincided with hers as a character, and so I can see why he obviously favors her above all others. She essentially represents his entire tenure in this sandbox, and it's hard to let that go. But one thing that a writer should absolutely never do is be afraid to kill off a character. If you are so attached to your OC that you're unwilling to let them go, to the point where you will literally inject time travel into the canon just to save her from death, then it might be time to take a step back and reflect on that. Ahsoka's arc in Season 2 of Rebels is actually pretty good. Before the Clone Wars Season 7 came out, the last time we saw her, she had just been framed for a crime she didn't commit, expelled from the Order, and handed over to the Republic to carry out her sentence like a piece of meat being fed to ravenous wolves. You see what I did there? I referenced wolves, like the thing that Dave does. Even after her name was cleared and she was accepted back into the Order, her faith in them was damaged too severely, and her trust in herself was too unstable for her to ever be able to go back to the way things were before. She walked away from it all. Then the war ended and all the Jedi were killed, and as far as Ahsoka knew, Anakin had died along with the rest of them. So when she finds out what he is, when she senses in the Force that cold, dark presence that's hunting her and the Rebels is the same person who used to make her feel warm and safe, she just can't accept that. She actively refuses to accept it even when it's staring her right in the face. It's only when the two come face to face and she hears his voice come out of that respirator.
Ahsoka. Ahsoka.
that she's finally forced to accept the truth of the matter and turn around and face him. Her declaration that she won't leave him this time is an admission of guilt, that she feels at least partially responsible for what happened to him. She feels like if she'd been there, she'd have been able to stop it. Now it's probably too late, but she's not about to walk away from him again. This time she's gonna face what she's been running from for all this time, even if that means both of them die here and now. The best part is, we don't even see what happened because we don't need to. We watch from Ezra's point of view as the fight continues and the doors close all around them, leaving it ambiguous how the final moments between these characters went down. We only see Vader emerge from the wreckage and the rest is implied. Ahsoka was one of the only people close enough to Anakin at this point in his life, so it's fitting that she would die in a vain effort to try and save him, and it's a wonderful, narratively satisfying send-off to a fan-favorite character. And then Dave Filoni brought her back. I find it really funny how now that this has happened, Vader has, at 2 different points in his life, been facing off against an opponent from his past who disappeared right in front of him the moment he struck them down. The poor bastard. Also, I know technically it was confirmed back when the episode originally aired that Ahsoka was still alive. I honestly don't know why it was such a debated topic in the fandom at the time. Like, she's right there. Why are we even discussing this, guys? But the mechanics involved with bringing her back weren't shown to us until a couple seasons later, and we've already talked about the World Between Worlds. Staying on topic, Filoni decided to undo what was a perfect send-off to his first ever OC because he was too attached to let her go. And now it just doesn't make any sense that she's still alive past the OT. Like, we already touched on this, but what was she doing for all that time? Before Malachor, she was working with the Rebellion, and I don't see what would have changed that she would decide not to go back to them. But also, we know she was at least training with Sabine during the OT, since that was apparently at the same time as the Mandalorian Purge, which means I don't know how she wouldn't have been in contact with the Rebels. And if that's the case, then I'm sorry, but she has way too many mutual friends with Luke that I find it extremely unlikely they never met. Even if we're accepting that their paths never crossed because they were both always busy on other missions or stationed on different bases, he would at the very least have heard about her, and she him. He's the son of famous Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, who was brought into the fight by Obi-Wan Kenobi himself, and the rebels who know Ahsoka personally and who her master was just decided it wasn't important to tell either of them about each other? I don't believe that. I'm sorry, I just don't. It's also pretty weird that she never came up in conversation between Luke and Obi-Wan or Yoda, and considering who she is and how powerful she's already been shown to be, I don't know why either of them weren't looking for her to kill Vader, since that was their express hope from Luke. Surely if anyone's up for the job, it'd be the much older and better trained Jedi cast out, no? Oh, yeah, and by the way, what the hell was with this line?
When gone am I, the last of the Jedi will you be?
Are we playing with semantics? Is it just that she's not calling herself a Jedi, even though she acts like one, fights like one, and trains Padawans like one? And I could almost excuse her being absent for A New Hope and Empire, because at least then we could infer she was busy with some other mission. But are you telling me she wouldn't be involved when she finds out Luke is going to confront Vader in hopes of redeeming him? Was she just not informed about the assault on the second Death Star? You'd think the rebels might have called her for that, since they were basically throwing everything they had at blowing that fucker up, but apparently she was in an area of space that didn't have cell service, probably wherever it was Luke and Zeb were hanging out for the entirety of this show. But that's the thing, the go-to defense for all of these things is she's busy. Doing fucking what? What was she doing that was more important than redeeming Anakin? The thing she was ready to give her life for just a handful of years ago. Her being busy is vague and doesn't really address anything. It's this show's job to tell us what the fuck she was doing for all those years. I find it hilarious how just a year ago, one of the biggest memes of the fandom was how Dave Filoni is obsessed with documenting every single second of Ahsoka's life. He showed us her birth, for Christ's sake. We didn't need to see that. But now there's this huge gap in her history that's absolutely essential to be explained for any of this to make any sense, and he just refuses to tell us what she was doing for those years. Now, despite all that, there was one thing about keeping her alive past the original trilogy that caught my intrigue. I figured if nothing else, at least it'll mean we get to actually see Luke and Ahsoka meet, and all that that would imply. Can you imagine a scene like that? Can you imagine the kinds of things they would have to talk about? The stories she could could tell him about Anakin, the reaction she would have to finding out that the man she considered like an older brother has not one, but two children who are the spitting image of their parents. You'd think she would naturally take them under her wing. And what would her reaction be to finding out how Anakin died? Imagine her learning that in his final moments he did the right thing, that after all he wasn't that cold, empty presence she felt in the Force. Not truly. Deep down there was still that small sliver of light that persisted in all that darkness, and that it was the love of his son that brought it back to the surface, causing him to right his wrongs and save the galaxy. I waited years to get that scene. And now it's too late. I mean, don't get me wrong, they still could do something like that, but it won't have nearly the same impact that it might have because we've already seen her and Luke interact, and it was after any of that would have gone down. So now if they ever decide to show us those moments, it just won't be the same. And that's what happens when a character stays well past the point that they should, and it becomes clear that the writer who's too proud of what he created to let it go no longer has any idea what to do with it. But I guess that's about everything. Friendly reminder before I go that this was apparently the good one, and my saying otherwise was a huge miss from me. We'll see how long it takes for the general perception of this show to sour, if it hasn't already by the time I upload this. Also, before you head off, consider joining my Discord server, because my friends tell me I never advertise it, which is totally not true. If you like talking about movies and shows, but don't have anyone to talk about them with, which I'm gonna go ahead and assume is the case if you clicked on this video, then you'll love it there. We talk about all kinds of storytelling and regularly host watch parties for movies and shows of various quality. We actually watched through all of Ahsoka together, which is where that clip I played earlier comes from. And since it's October, we've been going through all 13 of the Halloween movies, which has been totally awesome, and everyone unanimously agrees that they are the best horror movies of all time. What the fuck? I am down to skip these movies if you guys are.
I'm contemplating it.
Also, you could check out my Patreon if you want to give my greedy ass money, but otherwise, that's it for me. All the links are in the description, and as always, thanks for watching. Pleasure doing,
Yo! No way! No! Kanan!